There's a major manhunt underway to find one of the suspected terrorists from the Brussels attacks. Prosecutors say two brothers both blew themselves up yesterday as suicide bombers, one at the airport, the other at a nearby subway. But a third suspect remains on the run. At least 31 people were killed. More than 250 were injured. Belgian authorities said there are still many people involved in the attacks who are still believed to be living in Belgium. James Carafano is vice president of the Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank in Washington, where he focuses on foreign policy and international studies. He joins us now from Columbus, Ohio. Jim, we appreciate the time today. We want to start with the growing threat of ISIS, no longer now just a problem in the Middle East. Obviously, the terrorists are everywhere, obviously in Western Europe, and clearly the rest of the world needs to adapt. So what do you think at this point needs to happen before a terror group carries out a similar attack here in the U.S.?
Well, look, this is a really interesting question because ISIS has a global presence, but it's not the same all over the globe. I was just in South Asia, in India, Australia, Pakistan, talked to people from Malaysia, Indonesia. We've had folks, some of my analysts have just come back from the Middle East and from Western Europe. And what you see is the laydown's different in different places. In Europe, it's a big threat because those ISIS influences are coming in and are laying down over existing extremist networks. We don't have those extensive networks here in the United States. And in many ways, the United States is a much harder target. So what we tend to see is kind of these one-off homegrown type attacks. But that's not to say it's not a threat, because actually the number and the frequency of Islamist plots against the United States has actually dramatically increased in the last 2 years.
Meanwhile, the terror attacks in Brussels and France revealed to many a major disconnect now between European society and immigrant and Muslim communities there. It's something that some have seen now coming for decades. What then needs to change to break up what is increasingly becoming a breeding ground for terror?
Well, that's a great question, and I did kind of smile when somebody said people have discovered that Muslim communities are isolated and are becoming, areas in which extremists are laying roots. I mean, this has been a problem that's been growing for decades. It's largely a problem because of policies of the Europeans. Unlike immigration to the United States, Islamic Muslims that move from North Africa and the Middle East to Europe tend to all go to the same place. So you go and it's all people from the same village, and they're all Sunnis, they're all Shias, and so they're geographically kind of united. They're also economically united. They tend to be lower class. They tend to not have economic opportunity. They tend to not have education opportunity. They tend to not to become citizens. And so they're literally isolated little pockets of the old country and the new country. And that is a ground for extremism. There's two parts to that, and we see both of them in Belgium. One is, you have to actually assimilate. I mean, Europe has embraced this notion of multiculturalism and everybody do your own thing, and there's no strong sense of what does it mean to be a Belgique or what does it mean to be a Frenchman. And they've lost that, and they're paying the price for that. And the other thing is the way they police these communities is just, look, it's just bad. I mean, Belgium failed. I mean, they failed in public safety. They don't have the capacity. And they don't know how to work with these communities. They don't have officers who are Muslim. They don't have officers that speak the languages. They don't have officers that routinely go through the communities. So they don't do effective community policing. They don't do intelligence-led policing, and that's a problem. So they've got a problem on the civil society side, and they've got a problem on the other side. And then they've got the bigger problem, which is there is no job growth in Western Europe. There are no jobs for youth. There is no opportunity. There's this great stagnation. So you have a society that's not healthy. But that's not to excuse this, because I think oftentimes what we do is we talk about radicalization like it's catching the flu or a bug or something. So these people have agencies. They have chosen to become murderers. And sometimes I think we excuse them too much by focusing on the social ills and blaming that, and not focusing on people who have chosen a path which is just simply reprehensible and unacceptable.
You mentioned the communities. We also see that the internet, especially for ISIS, has become a particularly fertile breeding ground. To that end, then, I wonder, the ongoing encryption debate here in the United States between Apple and the FBI, how does this now play into a global security threat?
Right. So I think you've got to separate the two questions there. So terrorists do on the internet all the same things we do on the internet. They fundraise, they have their own Kickstarters, they arrange marriages, they do dating, they recruit, they organize, they do propaganda. So they use the internet for all the same things we do, a lot of it through social networks. And oftentimes I think people confuse the symptom with the problem. When they see a lot of terrorist activity in a social network, they say, oh, this is driving radicalization. But often what's driving terrorism is where the social networks lay down over active extremist networks, then you have a problem. But if it's just, broadcasting out, it's a different kind of situation. So on social networks, I think that's a symptom of the problem, not the problem itself. Now, what we also see is the terrorists getting much more sophisticated and recognizing that if you want to really get into fine-tuning recruiting and engaging somebody or plotting an attack, you want to do that in the dark web, which is a place where people aren't looking, or with encryption, which is basically you have kind of sealed your conversation so nobody else can see them. So they're increasingly doing that. A lot of people are doing that. That's why kids are using Snapchat and other things, because they don't want people to kind of see what they're talking about. The way I think intelligence has to deal with that is they have to recognize that's part of the modern landscape of technology, and they have to find ways to get to the criminal. So I'll give you a good example. The FBI recently withdrew the court case against Apple because they said, you know what? We think we can do this on its own. And that's what they should be doing. I think it's incredibly unrealistic, not to mention just flat wrong, that the notion that we're going to take modern encryption technology and we're going to give every government on the planet a backdoor into modern encryption technology. That's not going to happen. And then people are going to go and make other technologies. So if your plan is, I want a backdoor in everything, then you're living on the wrong planet, because it ain't going to happen.
James Carafano, we appreciate the time this morning.
Thank you for having me.